A millionaire who never noticed women falls deeply in love with a young black woman in the rain. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. The soft humming of the Bentley's engine did not help Lucas Valera feel any better. His mind was too full of thoughts. Another big meeting, more companies to buy, and so many emails to answer. At just 30 years old, he was already running a huge business. The tall glass building of Valera Energy in the middle of New York City reminded him every day of how much work he had to do. Lucas touched the watch on his wrist. It had belonged to his father, and he had worn it every day since his father's funeral 3 years ago. The smell of his cologne, a strong and fancy scent, still filled the car. "There's a lot of traffic today, Mr. Valera," his driver said while steering through the wet roads. It was raining outside. Lucas only nodded, looking at his phone. His screen was full of reports, important emails, and numbers. His whole life was about being in control, planning everything, making the right choices, and never being surprised. The car stopped at a red light. That's when something strange happened. Through the wet car window, he saw her. A young woman stood outside a small cafe. While everyone else ran for cover or hid under umbrellas, she did something different. She tilted her head back, letting the raindrops fall on her face. She stretched out her arms and spun around like she was dancing. Her curly hair bounced as she moved, shining with drops of water. She wore a big blazer over jeans and boots. Her clothes were wet, but she didn't care. But it was her smile that caught Lucas's attention. It was big, bright, and real. She looked so happy, so free. When was the last time Lucas had smiled like that? "Sir?" The driver's voice pulled him back. The light had turned green. "Drive on," Lucas said, fixing his tie. But as the car moved forward, he kept looking back at the woman until she was out of sight. Something about her stirred a feeling inside him, a feeling he had forgotten a long time ago. Up in his office, 50 stories above the busy city, Lucas tried to focus. The view from his window showed all of New York, but his mind kept going back to her. The way she had danced, so full of life. It was everything he was not. Everything his strict, controlled life didn't allow him to be. His office phone buzzed. "Mr. Valera, the hiring team sent up the files for tomorrow's new employees. Would you like to see them now?" "Leave them on my desk," he said. His voice was calm and serious, like always. That evening, he went to the gym, his only escape from work. He punched the heavy bag again and again. The sound echoed through the gym. Here, dressed in workout clothes instead of a fancy suit, he felt a little more like the person he used to be. "You're punching harder than usual," Miguel, his trainer, said. "Something wrong?" Lucas wiped the sweat from his face. "Just a lot on my mind." "You always got a lot on your mind, boss. That's your problem. You think too much." Later that night, Lucas stood by the big windows in his penthouse apartment. He held a glass of whiskey, looking at the shining lights of the city. The rain had stopped, leaving everything wet and glistening. His mother's last message played in his mind. "I just want to see you happy, sweetheart." But Lucas didn't let himself think about that. His mother was sick, and the doctors said she didn't have much time left. All she wanted was for him to find love, so he wouldn't be alone. But love was not in his plan. Love was messy. Love was out of control. His phone buzzed with a reminder, new employee orientation, 9 a.m. Lucas sat down and opened the first file, and then his heart stopped. There she was, the woman from the rain. Her professional photo couldn't capture how full of life she was, but her eyes had the same spark. Her name was Elena Navarro, 25 years old, an environmental engineer from Columbia University. For the first time in years, Lucas was completely unprepared for what would happen next. Elena Navarro stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her blazer. Sunlight came through the window of her small Brooklyn apartment, making her golden pendant shine. It was a gift from her mother when she graduated. "You've got this," she whispered to herself. Today was her first day at Valera Energy. the biggest renewable energy company in the country. It was a big deal. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "Proud of you, baby girl. Show them what you're made of." Elena smiled. Her mother had worked hard to help Elena and her brother go to college. Now, Elena wanted to make all that hard work worth it. The subway ride to Manhattan was fast. She had studied everything about Valera Energy. They were leaders in sustainable energy. But what really inspired her was their work in helping poorer communities get clean energy. That was the kind of work she wanted to be part of. The company's tall glass building stood in front of her. Elena took a deep breath and stepped inside. "Elena Navarro?" a voice called. A friendly woman smiled at her. "I'm Olivia from HR. Welcome to Valera Energy." The morning was a blur of meetings, paperwork, and introductions. Everyone was nice, but Elena noticed she was the only woman in the engineering group. "And this will be your desk," Olivia said, showing her a bright workspace with a view of the city. "Elena Navarro." That voice, deep, serious, and strong, it sent a shiver down her spine. She turned around. Lucas Valera stood there, dressed in a dark suit. His blue eyes locked onto hers. There was something in his gaze, recognition. He knew who she was. "Mr. Valera," Olivia said, surprised. "I didn't know you." "It's fine, Olivia. I'd like to speak with Miss Navarro alone. My office, please." Elena followed him, feeling nervous. People in the office were staring at them. His office was big, modern, and had an amazing view of the city. "Please sit." He gestured to a leather chair. Elena sat, trying to stay calm. Up close, he smelled expensive and powerful. Everything about him seemed controlled and serious. "You were dancing in the rain yesterday," he said. Heat rushed to Elena's cheeks. "You saw that? Hard to miss." His voice almost sounded amused. "Care to explain?" Elena straightened her back. "I had just found out I got this job. Sometimes happiness can't wait for perfect weather." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise? Longing? "And why did you choose Valera Energy?" he asked. Because you're doing something that matters," she said honestly. "Renewable energy isn't just about making money. It's about changing lives. I want to be part of that." Lucas stared at her for a moment. "You've done your research." "I believe in being prepared," she said, "though sometimes the best moments are the ones you don't plan for." His eyebrow lifted. "Like dancing in the rain?" "Exactly." Elena smiled. For a second, his serious mask slipped. She saw something softer underneath. But then he stood up. "Well, Miss Navarro, I look forward to seeing your work. You can go back to your orientation now." Elena walked to the door, then turned. "Mr. Valera?" "Yes," she smiled. "Sometimes the rain is worth getting wet for." Then she left, her heart racing. As she worked late that night, she kept catching glimpses of Lucas across the office, and every time he was watching her too. By evening, most of the office was empty. Elena stayed late because she wanted to get a head start on her project. Outside, the city lights were turning on, making the sky look purple and gold. "Still here," a voice said. Elena jumped a little. Lucas was standing in the doorway of the break room where she had gone to get coffee. "Just trying to get ahead," she said, reaching for a cup. Lucas walked to the coffee machine, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You take your coffee black?" he asked. "Actually, I like vanilla iced coffee," they both said at the same time. Elena looked at him, surprised that he knew that about her. "There's a great coffee shop around the corner," he said, his voice softer than it had been all day. "They make really good vanilla iced coffee." Was he asking her to get coffee? No, that couldn't be right. He was the CEO of Valera Energy. "Maybe another time," she said carefully. "I need to finish my work." He nodded, and for a moment she thought he looked disappointed. "Of course. Good evening, Miss Navarro." "Elena," she corrected him. "You can call me Elena." The air felt different, like something important was happening, but neither of them said anything. "Good evening, Elena," he said, her name soft on his lips. That night, Elena sat by her window in her apartment looking at the city lights. Her mother called, excited to hear about her first day at work. It was interesting," Elena said, thinking about Lucas's deep blue eyes and his expensive cologne. Good interesting or bad interesting? Her mom asked. Elena smiled, touching her necklace. I don't know yet, but I think this job is going to be full of surprises. Across the city in his penthouse, Lucas stood by his window too. He remembered something from long ago, a woman dancing in the rain, showing him that the best moments in life were the ones you never expected. 2 weeks later, Alina stayed late again. Her desk lamp made a small pool of light in the dark office. She was working on a project to bring solar energy to poor neighborhoods. It was important, but her mind kept drifting to Lucas's office, where the lights were still on. Lucas was always nearby, not obviously, but she felt it. A glance through the glass walls during meetings, a moment when he passed by her desk and stayed just a little too long, the way she felt his eyes on her when he thought she wasn't looking. You're still here, Lucas said. Elena looked up, surprised. He stood by her desk, his tie loose, his jacket over his arm. In the soft light, he didn't look like the powerful CEO. He looked like a man with a lot on his shoulders. This project won't right itself, she said, pointing at her computer. I really think the Brooklyn Housing Initiative could benefit from our solar energy. Lucas walked closer and leaned against her desk to look at her work, his cologne wrapped around her like a warm hug. Show me, he said. Elena pulled up her presentation, very aware of how close he was. The first cost is high, but families will save money in the long run. Plus, it helps the environment. What about the buildings? They're old, he asked, his voice curious instead of challenging. I thought about that, she said, typing quickly. See here? We can change our systems so they work with older electrical setups. It's tricky, but... She turned to look at him and saw that he wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at her. His blue eyes were intense, making her heart beat faster. You really care about this, he said. I grew up in buildings like these, she admitted. I know what it's like when families have to choose between food and electricity. Lucas's face changed, like he understood something new about her. Tell me more, he said. So she did. She told him about her mother working extra shifts, about hot summer nights when they couldn't afford air conditioning, about her little brother doing homework by candlelight. That's why renewable energy matters, she finished. It's not just about money or the planet. It's about changing lives. Lucas was quiet for a long time. You're going to change this company, Elena Navarro. Before she could say anything, his phone buzzed. The moment between them disappeared. He looked at the message, his face tightening. Everything okay? She asked. Just family stuff, he said, putting his professional mask back on. Good work on the proposal. We'll talk more tomorrow. Elena watched him leave. She had heard whispers about his sick mother. Now she saw the weight he carried. The next morning, Elena got to work early with a vanilla iced coffee in her hand. There was a note on her desk, meeting at 9 a.m. My office. PD. Her heart raced as she took the elevator up. His assistant waved her in. Lucas stood by the window, looking at the city. I've been thinking about your proposal, he said, turning around. The morning light softened his face. I want you to lead the project. What? She almost dropped her coffee. But I've only been here 2 weeks. You understand these communities. You have the knowledge and the passion, he said, stepping closer. Unless you don't think you're ready? Elena stood straighter. I'm ready. He gave her the smallest smile. Good. We present to the board next week. Next week? She started thinking about everything she needed to do. We'll work on it together, he said, if that's okay with you. The way he said week sent a shiver down her spine. Of course, she said. Over the next few days, they spent long hours working together. They stayed late, eating takeout, talking about data and ideas. Lucas had a sharp mind and, to her surprise, a dry sense of humor. One night she noticed him rubbing his temples. Headache? She asked. It's nothing. Elena took a small bottle from her bag. Peppermint oil. My mom swears by it. He looked doubtful but let her apply it. She gently massaged his temples. He closed his eyes, relaxing under her touch. Better? She asked. He murmured. Elena realized how close they were, her fingers in his hair, his head tilted back, trusting her completely. Her heart pounded. She stepped away quickly. I should go. It's late. His eyes opened, filled with something she didn't understand. Elena, good night, Mr. Valera. She ran to the elevator, her heart racing. She was playing with fire. The next morning, a small box was on her desk. Inside was vanilla iced coffee and a note, "Thank you for the headache cure. PD." Their eyes met through the glass walls. They didn't smile, but something was changing between them. Elena looked up at his office. He was talking on the phone, but when their eyes met through the glass, they didn't smile. Still, something passed between them. It was like a silent message, as if they both knew they had crossed a line and things were changing. Elena put a note into her desk drawer, right next to her work papers and big dreams. She knew she was playing with fire, but as she took a sip of her coffee, made exactly the way she liked, she wondered if some fires were worth the risk. The big meeting room was filled with people waiting. Elena stood at the front, ready to give her presentation. Her heart was beating fast, but on the outside, she looked calm. She had practiced many times, but now, standing in front of the important people at Valera Energy, it felt scary. Lucas, the boss, sat at the head of the table. His face didn't show any emotion, but when their eyes met, he gave her a tiny nod. No one else seemed to notice, but that small gesture gave her confidence. "Good morning," Elena said, her voice strong and clear. "Today, I will talk about our plan for the Brooklyn Housing Initiative." As she spoke, she found her rhythm. This wasn't just about impressing these people. It was about helping real families. She explained the details, the costs, the benefits, and how it would change the community for the better. "But this will cost a lot of money," one board member said, looking doubtful. "How do we know we'll get our money back?" Before Elena could answer, another voice spoke up. "Money isn't everything, Javier." Everyone turned to look at Gabriela Moreau, the oldest and most respected person on the board. She was in her 70s, with silver hair and sharp eyes. People always listened when she talked. "This young woman is showing us how to make a real difference," Gabriela said, looking at Elena with approval. "Go on, dear." Elena finished her presentation strongly, answering all the questions with confidence. When the meeting was over, people left the room, but Gabriela stayed behind. "Walk with me," she said to Elena. Then she looked at Lucas. "You too, young man." They followed Gabriela to her office, a cozy place filled with photos and awards. She sat down and looked at them carefully. "That was impressive," she said to Elena. "You remind me of someone I used to know. Your father." Elena saw Lucas stiffen beside her. "He believed business could change the world," Gabriela continued. "And you, my dear, have that same fire." "Thank you, Gabriela," Lucas said, his voice tight. Gabriela leaned forward. "Now, why don't you two tell me what's really going on?" Elena's heart stopped. What?" Gabriela waved a hand. "Oh, please. I've been on this board for 40 years. I know chemistry when I see it." "There's nothing," Lucas started. "Don't insult me," Gabriela said kindly. "I saw how you watched her during that meeting, Lucas. Just like your father used to watch your mother." Silence filled the room. Elena felt the weight of unspoken words pressing on her. "It's not right," Lucas finally said. His voice was cold. "Love usually isn't," Gabriela said. She stood up. "Think about it, both of you." Then she left, leaving them alone with the word love hanging in the air. "Elena," Lucas started. "Don't," she said quickly, gathering her papers. Her hands were shaking. "We should focus on work?" But later that day, Elena got an urgent email. Her brother was in the hospital. He had an asthma attack because of bad air in his dorm room. Without thinking, she grabbed her bag and ran to the elevator. Lucas was stepping out just as she stepped in. "Elena, what's wrong?" "My brother," she whispered. "He's in the hospital." "I'll drive you," Lucas said. "No, I can't ask you." You're not asking, he said, pressing the button. I'm offering. The car ride was quiet, but having Lucas there made her feel less alone. At the hospital, Elena's strong professional mask finally broke. This is why the housing project matters, she said softly. Old buildings, bad air. It's hurting real people, my brother. Lucas took her hand and squeezed it. He'll be okay. When they got to the room, her mother looked surprised to see Elena with a man in a fancy suit. Mom, this is Lucas Valera, Elena said. Her mother's eyes widened. I've seen you in the papers. Lucas shook her mother's hand. Your daughter is doing amazing work at our company. They talked quietly while Elena sat with her brother. Through the window, she saw Lucas speaking with her mother. He looked concerned, like he really cared. When her brother was finally allowed to go home, Lucas made sure his driver took them all. Thank you, Elena said softly as they watched her family go inside. For everything. Lucas's voice was rough. What Gabriella said, we can't. Elena turned to face him. You're my boss, the CEO. It would ruin everything. Is that what you really think, or just what you think you have to say? Before she could answer, his phone rang. He looked down and his face changed. It's my mother's nurse. I have to take this, Elena nodded. Good night, Mr. Valera. That night, alone in her apartment, Elena's phone lit up with a text. Some things matter more than titles. She stared at the message, thinking about how he had been there when she needed someone. Across town, Lucas sat beside his sick mother. She opened her eyes and whispered, You met someone. I can tell. Rest, Mom? Is she worth breaking the rules for? Lucas thought about Elena, her fire, her kindness, the way she made him feel alive again. Maybe some rules should be broken, he said softly. His mother smiled and fell asleep. On his phone, a new message from Gabriella Moreau glowed. Don't let fear stop you from being happy. Your father would want better for you. Lucas closed his eyes. He had spent years building walls around his heart. Now, because of Elena, those walls were starting to fall. After Elena's big presentation, she got a lot of attention. She was invited to important meetings. People whispered in the hallways. Was she really this talented, or was it because of her connection to the CEO? One rainy night, she was working late when Lucas came to her door. You should go home, he said. It's almost 9. She smiled. Look who's talking. I have a charity event tomorrow, he said. A room full of rich people who only pretend to care. Sounds terrible, she teased. Come with me, he said. Elena's heart skipped. I can't. As my project lead, he added, the donors need to hear from you. She sighed. People are already talking. Let them. His voice was soft now, and I thought I was the fearless one. Before she could answer, there was a knock. Gabriella stood there, smiling knowingly. Elena, the gala is black tie, she said. You'll need something spectacular. That night, Elena called her mom. Her mom was so excited. Baby girl, this is big for your job. Elena took a deep breath. Mom, what if it's not just about my job? There was silence. Then her mom asked, Is this about him? Lucas Valera? Elena sighed. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who knows you well, her mom said. Elena, you worked so hard to get here. Don't let anyone question that, but you also deserve to be happy. The next evening, Elena stood in front of the mirror. She wore a beautiful dark blue dress. Her friend Gabriella had let her borrow it. The dress fit her perfectly and flowed down to the floor. Her curly hair was up, with a few strands framing her face. Perfect, Gabriella said, fixing the dress. Now, hold your head up high. You belong there just like everyone else. The big party was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Elena's eyes went wide when she walked in. The whole place looked magical with twinkling lights and fancy decorations. People were chatting and waiters walked around with glasses of shiny golden drinks. Then she saw Lucas. He was talking to a group of rich people. But the moment he saw Elena, his eyes locked onto her. His gaze made her cheeks feel warm. A man walked up to her. Elena Navarro? I'm Christopher Bennett from the Wall Street Journal. I'd love to hear about the housing project. Elena smiled and started talking about her work. More people gathered around, listening to her speak with passion. "She's amazing, isn't she?" a voice said. Alina turned to see Lucas standing beside her. He handed her a glass of champagne. The pride in his voice made her heart beat faster. "Mr. Valera was just telling us about your fast success at the company," Christopher said. "Very impressive for someone so young." Something in his voice made Elena uncomfortable. "The project's success speaks for itself," she replied. Christopher smiled. "Of course, but knowing the right people never hurts." Before Elena could answer, the music started playing. Lucas placed a hand on her back. "Excuse us," he said. "Elena promised me a dance." He led her to the dance floor. One of his hands held hers, and the other rested gently on her waist. They moved together as if they had done this 100 times before. "I never promised you a dance," she whispered. "Oh, think of it as saving me from boring conversations." His thumb rubbed small circles on her back. "You look beautiful tonight." Elena's breath hitched. "Lucas, we shouldn't." His voice was rough. "Elena, I can't." Suddenly his assistant rushed over. "Mr. Valera, I'm sorry, but it's your mother. The hospital just called." Lucas's face turned pale. Elena felt his whole body tense up. "I have to go," he said. "I'm coming with you," Elena said firmly. "Elena, don't argue." The car ride to the hospital was silent. Lucas held Elena's hand tightly. Under the bright hospital lights, they found his mother awake, but weak. She smiled when she saw Lucas. "Darling," she whispered. Then her eyes moved to Elena. "And who is this lovely young woman?" Elena stepped forward. "Elena Navarro. I work with your son." Lucas's mother's eyes sparkled. "Ah, so you're the one who makes him smile again." "Mother," Lucas warned. She chuckled. "Life is too short, my love." She took Elena's hand. "Stay with him. He needs someone who sees past his walls." Later, in the quiet hallway, Elena watched Lucas talking to the doctors. When he came back, his face looked tired. "She's stable," he said softly. Elena pulled him into a hug without thinking. For a moment he was stiff. Then slowly he relaxed against her. He buried his face in her neck. "I can't lose her too," he whispered. "I'm here," she murmured, holding him close. "I'm right here." Down the hall, Gabriella watched them. She pulled out her phone. Tomorrow's newspapers wouldn't say anything about Lucas leaving the party early or the woman who left with him. Some stories, she knew, needed time to grow. The next morning at work, Elena sat at her desk, staring at her computer. She wasn't really seeing the screen. An article from the Wall Street Journal was open. "Rising Star at Valera Energy, Merit or Favoritism," by Christopher Bennett. Her hands clenched. The article made it sound like she had only succeeded because of Lucas. "Don't read that nonsense," Gabriella said. Elena looked up. "They're questioning everything I've worked for." "Let them question," Gabriella said. "Now, tell me, what happened at the hospital last night?" Elena thought of Lucas holding on to her like she was his anchor in a storm. "His mother is stable. That's all." Before Gabriella could say more, a buzz of excitement swept through the office. Lucas had arrived, but he wasn't alone. A tall, elegant woman walked beside him, her hand on his arm. They looked alike, with the same sharp features and confident air. "That's his aunt," Gabriella said. "Isabel Valera. She flew in from London this morning. She's also the biggest shareholder of Valera Energy." The morning dragged on. Elena buried herself in work, trying to ignore the steady stream of people going in and out of Lucas's office. Around noon, her phone buzzed with a text. "Roof, 1 p.m. Please, PD." The rooftop garden was a peaceful place. At 1 p.m., Elena found Lucas there, his tie loosened. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey, how's your mom?" "Better." He ran a hand through his hair. "Elena, about last night." "It's fine," she said quickly. "You were upset. It doesn't have to mean—" "It meant everything." He stepped closer. "You were there. No questions. No expectations. Just there." Elena's heart pounded. "I saw the article," he said. "I'll have PR fix it." "No." She stepped back. "That will make it worse. I need to prove myself." "You already have. The board loves your work. The project is doing great. Why can't you see that?" The rooftop door opened. Isabel Valera stepped out. "So, this is where you disappeared to." She looked at Elena. "You must be Miss Navarro." Elena straightened. "Yes, ma'am." "The board is waiting, dear," Isabel told Lucas. After they left, Elena stayed on the roof. Her phone buzzed with another text. "Dinner tonight. We need to talk. PD." That evening, Elena worked late. The office was empty when Isabel walked in. "Walk with me, Miss Navarro." Elena followed her to Gabriella's office. "We need to talk about your future," Isabel said. "You are talented, but my nephew is the CEO and asked us of the Valera line. His father's death nearly ruined this company. His mother's illness affects everything. We can't have distractions." Elena's heart pounded. "Are you saying I'm a distraction?" Gabriella interrupted. "That's enough, Isabel." Later, in the parking garage, Lucas found Elena. "Talk to me." "I can't do this," she whispered. "I won't be the reason your company suffers." He cupped her face. "I don't care about rumors. I care about you." Tears filled Elena's eyes. "I need time to think." He nodded. "I'll wait." Elena drove home, feeling confused. Her lips still tingled from where Lucas had pressed his forehead against hers. As she reached home, her phone lit up with a message from him. "Whatever you decide, know this. You've already changed my world." That night, Elena lay awake, torn between her big dreams for her job and the strong feelings she had for Lucas. Across the city, Lucas stood in his tall apartment, looking out at the lights of New York. Holding Elena in his arms had been the first time he had felt truly happy since his father passed away. 3 days passed. Elena stood in the rain outside her apartment, letting the water fall on her face. It had been 3 days since she faced Isabel Valera. 3 days of ignoring Lucas's calls. 3 days of trying to convince herself that staying away from him was the right choice. But it wasn't working. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Gabriella. "The housing initiative presentation is tomorrow. Don't let fear stop you." Inside her apartment, her mother was waiting with a warm cup of tea. "You're soaked," her mother said gently, "and you're hurting." Elena sat down, feeling overwhelmed. "I don't know what to do, Mom. Tell me." She explained everything. Isabel's warnings, Lucas's words in the garage, and how her heart felt torn in two. Her mother listened, then held Elena's hands. "Do you remember when you were little and wanted to be an engineer? Everyone said it was too hard, that girls like you didn't belong in that world. But you proved them wrong. So why is this any different?" Before Elena could answer, her phone buzzed again. A message from Lucas. "I'll respect your need for space, but please don't let my aunt's fear become yours. The housing initiative needs you. The community needs you." Elena closed her eyes and remembered his words in the garage. "Prove them wrong. With me beside you." The next morning, Elena walked into City Hall with her head held high. The council chamber was full. City officials, community leaders, and in the back row, Gabriella Moreau. Elena stood at the podium, ready to present. Then the chamber door opened one last time. Lucas walked in, but he wasn't alone. Beside him, in a wheelchair, sat his mother, looking weak but determined. Isabel stood behind them, her face tight with disapproval. Elena's heart skipped a beat when Mrs. Valera looked at her and smiled, the same warm smile from the hospital. Taking a deep breath, Elena began her speech. She didn't just talk about solar panels and saving energy. She talked about families like hers, about kids doing homework by candlelight, about people who were forgotten by progress. "This isn't just about clean energy," she said. "It's about hope." The council asked tough questions, but Elena answered them with confidence and passion. When the vote passed, the room burst into applause. As Elena walked past Mrs. Valera, the older woman smiled. "Well done, dear. You remind me so much of my late husband. He believed business could have a heart." Isabel stepped forward. "Miss Navarro." "Not now, Isabel," Mrs. Valera interrupted firmly. "Lucas, help me to the car. I'd like to rest before dinner." She turned to Elena. "Would you join us?" Before Elena could answer, Gabriella appeared. "Actually, I need to borrow Miss Navarro for a moment." In Gabriella's car, they drove in silence for a while. Then Gabriella spoke. You've been avoiding him. I needed time to think. And have you thought or just worried? Elena looked out the window. Both. Gabriella sighed. Did I ever tell you about Lucas's father? He was brilliant like his son, but with a bigger heart than most businessmen. When he met Camila, Lucas's mother, the company board was against it. She was a music teacher, not from their world. What happened? Elena asked. He chose love and built something even greater because of it. Gabriella parked outside a restaurant. Now go inside. Someone's waiting. Elena found Lucas sitting at a table, his tie loose, his hair messy, signs of a long day. You were amazing today, he said as she sat down. Your mother, how is she? Better. She insisted on coming. She said she needed to see the woman who was changing her son's world. He reached across the table, touching her hand. Elena, these past 3 days I've missed you, she whispered. Then why did I stay away? Because I'm scared. Not of your aunt or the board or the rumors. I'm scared of how much I feel for you. It's overwhelming. You think I'm not scared? Lucas's voice was full of emotion. Elena, you walked into my life and broke down every wall I built. You made me question everything I thought I knew about control, about business, about life. Before he could say more, his phone buzzed. He read the message, and the color drained from his face. It's my mother. She's collapsed. They rushed to the hospital. In the waiting room, Isabel was pacing. This is what happens when you're distracted, she snapped at Lucas. Mrs. Valera's voice came from the doorway. I'm fine. Just tired. Mom, no, you listen to me, Lucas Valera. Even weak, her voice was strong. I have watched you hide behind your father's shadow for 3 years. Today, I watched this remarkable young woman fight for what she believes in. And I saw you, my son, looking at her the way your father used to look at me. Isabel stepped forward. Camila. Life is too short for fear, Isabel. You, of all people, should know that. Mrs. Valera reached for Elena's hand. Come here, dear. Elena knelt beside her. Mrs. Valera's next question made her heart stop. Do you love my son? Elena felt Lucas's presence behind her, Isabel's stare, but all she saw was kindness in Mrs. Valera's eyes. Yes, she whispered, I do. Mrs. Valera squeezed her hand. Then that's all that matters. The rest is just noise. That night, Lucas and Elena stood on the hospital roof, the city lights twinkling around them. I meant it, Elena said softly. I love you. Lucas turned to her, and for the first time there was no hesitation in his eyes. I love you too. No more running. Instead of answering, Elena kissed him. And in that moment, all her fears disappeared. They had chosen love. Everything else was just details. The next morning, the news went wild. Photos of their kiss on the hospital roof were everywhere. Headlines called them a power couple. Elena's phone kept buzzing. Don't read them, Lucas said, making her breakfast. Hard not to. Some say I'm not being professional. Your work speaks for itself, he reassured her. The elevator dinged. Gabriella stepped in. The board has called a meeting. Some want to remove Elena from the housing initiative. Others want Lucas to step down as CEO. Elena's heart sank. That's ridiculous. It's about perception, not facts, Gabriella said. Lucas's jaw clenched. Then we fight. As they walked into the boardroom, Elena straightened Lucas's tie. Whatever happens, we face it together. The big meeting room was full. Isabel sat at one end of the long table, her face calm. The other people in the room did not look at each other as Elena and Lucas walked in. Before anyone could say anything, Beatrice spoke. I have something to say. Everyone turned to look at her. 3 days ago, my sister-in-law, Lucas's mother, called me a coward. Beatrice's voice shook a little. She said I was too afraid of the past to see the future clearly. Elena felt Lucas's body stiffen next to her. Beatrice continued, I watched my brother build this company with love in his heart. When he died, I promised to protect his dream. I thought that meant keeping it the same, avoiding risks, but I was wrong. People in the room whispered to each other. Beatrice looked straight at Elena. Miss Navarro's housing project is not just a good idea. It's exactly what my brother wanted. Clean energy for everyone, not just the rich. She turned to Lucas. Her eyes were soft now. You are so much like your father. He also knew the best ideas come from the heart. Lucas looked at her with surprise. Aunt Isabel. Beatrice smiled. I also want to officially acknowledge the relationship between our CEO, Lucas, and Miss Navarro, as long as they keep it professional, of course. Gabriella, another board member, stood up. I agree. The other members voted. It was a yes from everyone. Later, in Lucas's office, Elena sat next to him. Did that really happen? She asked. I guess my mom got through to her, Lucas said, wrapping his arms around Elena. Elena smiled against his chest. It must run in the family. You got through to me too. Lucas laughed. Did I? You ran away for 3 days. Elena pouted. But I came back. You did. He kissed her softly, and now everyone knows you're mine. Elena raised an eyebrow. That's a little bold, Mr. Valera. Lucas's eyes twinkled. Would you rather I show you? Before he could, there was a knock. Gabriella walked in, smiling. The press wants a statement, she said, and the mayor's office called. They want you both at the groundbreaking ceremony for the housing project next week. Elena's eyes widened. Both of us? Gabriella grinned. The city's favorite power couple bringing clean energy to the people? It's a perfect story. That night, Elena took Lucas to her old neighborhood in Brooklyn. They walked hand in hand through the streets, where soon, thanks to their work, there would be solar panels on every building. My mom invited us for dinner on Sunday, Elena said. She's making her famous jerk chicken. Lucas smiled. Should I be scared? Elena laughed. Terrified. She's already planning our wedding. Lucas stopped walking. Would that be so bad? Elena's heart skipped. Lucas, not now. Not now, he agreed, but someday, when you're ready. Elena stood on tiptoes and kissed him. Someday. Just then, Lucas's phone buzzed, a message from his mother. Bring her for lunch tomorrow, and tell her to stop worrying about what people think. Love gave me my happiest years. It will do the same for you. Elena read the message over his shoulder and smiled. Your mom is very wise. Lucas pulled her closer, almost as wise as the woman who taught me to dance in the rain. As if on cue, the sky opened up and rain began to fall. They tilted their faces up and let it wash over them. They had chosen love just like Lucas's parents had, and in that choice they found strength. The groundbreaking ceremony was a huge success. Under a bright autumn sun, Elena and Lucas stood together in front of a big crowd. As Elena cut the ribbon, Lucas's hand rested gently on her lower back. Cameras flashed. Elena smiled at the crowd. Today, we are not just building houses, we are breaking barriers. The next day, the headlines were everywhere. Power couple brings solar energy to Brooklyn. A green energy revolution begins at home. That night, as they celebrated at a restaurant, Lucas's phone rang. The hospital. His mother was very sick. When they arrived, Mrs. Valera was weak, but her eyes lit up when she saw them. My darlings, she whispered. Don't look so worried. I'm just tired. Mom, Lucas's voice cracked. She squeezed their hands. I have something to tell you both. Elena tried to step back, but Mrs. Valera held on to her. Stay, dear. This is for you too. She took a deep breath. Lucas, your father left something for you in the safe at home. I've been waiting for the right time. That night, in his father's old study, Lucas opened the safe. Inside was a letter and a small velvet box. Elena stood in the doorway, watching as Lucas read. Tears filled his eyes. He knew, Lucas whispered. Somehow he knew I'd find someone like you. My son, if you're reading this, I am gone. But if your mother waited to give you this, it means you found love. The kind that makes business worth doing, success worth achieving. The ring in this box belonged to your grandmother. I gave it to your mother when I chose love over tradition. The board fought us too, but love made me a better man, a better leader. Don't let fear stop you from living fully. That is not the legacy I want for you. Love, Dad. Lucas opened the box. Inside was a beautiful vintage engagement ring. Elena's heart raced. Lucas smiled. I'm not asking yet. He put the ring away. But I want you to know it's yours. When we're ready. Elena kissed him. When we're ready. A few weeks later, Elena had to go to London for an important speech. But as her departure got closer, Mrs. Valera got sicker. I'll cancel, Elena said. Lucas shook his head. No, she would never forgive me if I let you miss this opportunity. Go. Shine. The night before she left, their families had dinner together. Their mothers got along well, sharing stories that made Elena and Lucas blush. Elena's mother grinned. Remember when you danced in the rain? Mrs. Valera nodded. Lucas came home different that day. I knew something had changed. A week later, during Elena's big speech, Beatrice walked in. Elena's heart stopped. After the speech, Beatrice said, It's your mother-in-law. The doctors say she only has hours. We have a jet ready. The flight home felt endless. When she arrived at the hospital, she found Lucas praying in the chapel. You're supposed to be in London, he said. Elena knelt beside him. I'm supposed to be here, with you. Mrs. Valera smiled weakly. Take care of my boy. He acts strong, but his heart is big. Mom, please. I'm so proud of you both. And then she closed her eyes. Months later, Elena and Lucas stood in the rain outside the finished housing project. Elena let the raindrops fall on her face. Lucas whispered, Mom loved the rain. It reminded her of new beginnings. Elena held Lucas's hand tightly. She remembered something from the past. She could still hear the words from that special morning. I'm so proud of you both. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. A little girl from the building cut the ribbon while her mother cried happy tears. She told everyone how the lower energy costs would help her family. Elena saw Lucas quickly wipe away a tear. Gabriella and Isabel stood together under an umbrella, smiling proudly. Their company had done well because of Elena and Lucas's hard work. They showed that kindness and business could work together. That evening, Elena went back to Valera Energy. She stood in the same spot where she had first met Lucas. The office was quiet because most people had already gone home. She was deep in thought when Gabriella walked up beside her. Thinking about the past? Gabriella asked. Yes, Elena said. Everything is different now. Love changes things. Gabriella smiled. It sure does. Elena touched the small velvet box in her pocket. Her mother had given it to her that morning. Inside was her grandmother's wedding ring, smooth from years of love. I'm going to ask him to marry me, Elena said softly. Gabriella's eyes widened. You're not waiting for him to ask you. Elena laughed. Since when do I do things the normal way? Besides, his mom once told me that sometimes men need a little push toward happiness. Gabriella hugged her. Camila would have loved this. He's in his office. Go get him, dear. Elena walked into Lucas's office. He was reading some papers about their company's work in the community. When he saw her, his face softened, like it always did when she was near. Hey, beautiful. I thought you went home, he said. Not without you, she said, stepping closer. Do you remember when I first came to this office? Lucas smiled. How could I forget? You changed the way I thought about everything. I did more than that. Elena took his hand and made him stand up. I fell in love with you here, with your passion, your kindness, and how you tried to control everything when all you really wanted was to let go. Lucas's eyes filled with emotion. Elena. Elena. She pulled out the velvet box and opened it. Inside was the simple gold ring from her grandmother. Lucas's breath caught. Your father left you your grandmother's ring to give to the woman you love, she said softly. My mother gave me my grandmother's ring to give to the man who is worthy of my heart. She took a deep breath. Lucasip Valera, will you marry me? For a moment, Lucas didn't move. Then, to her surprise, he laughed. A deep, happy laugh she didn't hear often. Wait here, he said, walking to his safe. He turned back with a velvet box of his own. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Elena's eyes filled with tears. He opened the box, revealing his grandmother's engagement ring. I was going to ask you tonight after the ceremony, he admitted, but you beat me to it. You always do. Is that a yes? Elena asked, her voice shaking. Instead of answering, Lucas kissed her deeply. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Yes, he whispered. 1,000 times yes. They put the rings on each other's fingers right there in the office where their story had begun. His grandmother's ring fit perfectly on her hand, and her grandmother's ring looked just right on his. That night, they threw a party at Lucas's penthouse. Their families, Gabriella, Isabel, and everyone who had helped them on their journey, came to celebrate. To new beginnings, Gabriella said, raising her glass. And to those who helped us get here, Lucas added, looking at his mother's favorite chair. It was empty, but her love was still with them. As their guests laughed and cheered, Elena slipped out onto the balcony. The rain had stopped, and the city sparkled under the stars. Lucas followed her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Are you happy? He asked, kissing her ear softly. More than I ever imagined, she said, turning to face him. Your mother once told me that love makes everything more beautiful. She was right. Lucas smiled and touched her ring. What do you say we have the wedding in the rain? Elena laughed. Only if you promise to dance with me. I'll dance with you every day for the rest of our lives. Inside, their friends and family kept celebrating. Elena could hear her mother and Isabel already making wedding plans, while Gabriella told funny stories about their early days. But out on the balcony, it was just the two of them, a woman who loved to dance in the rain and a man who had learned to dance with her. Their love story had started with a joyful moment. They had faced challenges, but each one made them stronger. I love you, Elena whispered against his lips. I love you too, Lucas replied. Thank you for showing me that the best things in life can't be controlled. They have to be lived. Above them, the clouds parted, revealing a bright full moon. Its light made their rings shine, a symbol of their love. They had chosen each other again and again, through happiness and sadness, through hard times and victories. And in that choice, they found not just love, but purpose, a dream of making the world a better place. As if celebrating with them, a soft rain began to fall. This time, they both lifted their faces to it, embracing the moment, just like they embraced their love, completely, with open hearts, ready for whatever the future would bring. If you have the courage to love someone, even if it might affect your work, and if you were Lucas, would you be willing to let go of control for love? Thanks for watching. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Check out our other videos too. See you in the next one.